Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can get started with messaging in .NET using NServiceBus. NServiceBus is the second most popular messaging library in .NET after mass transit, and even though it's not my personal favorite, many companies, especially enterprises, are using it. So I thought I would make a video to show you how you can get started, because if you join a new company, especially a big company, it is very likely they're going to be using NServiceBus. I think it's a very good product that, because it was ahead of its time when it was first created, it doesn't necessarily have the best developer experience and API, but it's still a very good product. It's widely supported. It is commercial, I have to point that one out. And the fact that it is commercial means that it is also very well supported. So in this video, we're going to see what NServiceBus is, how it works. We're going to see it working with RabbitMQ, and we're also going to integrate with a cloud provider. We're going to use AWS. And this video is in fact sponsored by AWS. So if you want to get started for free with AWS and get $25 worth of credit for free, check the link in the description down below. Okay, so what I have here. I have a bunch of projects. I'm going to start with this one called NServiceBus demo, which is just a simple console application. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the NServiceBus library, just the main one to start with. I'm going to show you from the very bottom, and then we're going to build on that knowledge. Now, this video does assume that you understand what messaging is. You have a basic understanding of queues and pub/sub, mainly because I've already talked about this topic so much in other videos. But effectively, NServiceBus and all of these other libraries like mass transit and so on, they all have one main goal, which is simplify and unify the way we do messaging or asynchronous communication in applications. And that usually has the form of a queue or a pub/sub scenario with a topic where you would publish a message in a location or an event, and the naming gets a bit weird because different services call things different ways, but you publish basically a payload, usually a JSON object. You put it somewhere in some engine, usually a message broker, and then that is then sent somewhere else and consumed. That's basically the idea. You have point A, point B, something in the middle, you push in that middle thing, and that middle thing then sends it somewhere else. And that also adds things like resilience. So if something fails during the process, you have more guarantees, and that's the main idea. And NServiceBus, mass transit, and so on, they all try to simplify the way you integrate with those services, because if you use RabbitMQ, you'd have to use the RabbitMQ SDK, which is bad. If you're using AWS, you'll have to use the AWS SDK, which is better. If you use Azure, then you have to use the Azure one, and so on. It gets a bit tedious to change your code, so it's basically an abstraction. Now, like I said, NServiceBus is not my favorite way to do this. My favorite way to do this is with mass transit, because I think it has a significantly better API and a more modernized developer experience. And that's why we just released a 6.5-hour course on getting started with messaging in .NET with mass transit. So if you want to learn all of these concepts in way more detail by someone who has been using it for a long time, then check the link in the description. And the first 400 of you who use discount code TRANSIT20 at checkout are going to get 20% off your purchase. Okay, so let's just get started. The first thing you need in NServiceBus is an endpoint configuration. So I'm going to create a new endpoint configuration object, and I'm going to give it a name. This is just a logical name of that endpoint configuration. So I'm just going to say demo. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say endpoint configuration, and I'm going to configure a serializer. So I'm going to say use serialization system JSON serializer, and that is going to use a system.text.json serializer to serialize the object. Almost always what you're publishing is just a JSON object. That's why we're using this serializer, because we want to use the Microsoft serializer to serialize our C# classes, the messages we'll be publishing in those queues. Then what I'm going to need is a transport, and transport is what NServiceBus calls the medium of what you'll be using to transport those messages. So in this case, we'll be using an in-memory one just for learning purposes, and it's very appropriately named. I'm going to say endpoint used transport and then learning transport. Here we go. And that is just an in-memory implementation. It will be able to just publish something in memory without needing a queue somewhere else externally, or even locally with Docker, and will make it very easy to demonstrate the capabilities of NServiceBus. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my endpoint. So I'm going to say endpoint instance equals await endpoint dot start. And I'm going to pass down the endpoint configuration in that start method. And that is it. That is going to start my service, this background service that's going to be running. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to publish 3 messages. So I'm going to say that for 3 items, publish a command. Now, I don't have a command class. I'm going to create it. NServiceBus has 3 types of messages. It has the command, it has the event, and it has the message. Commands have 1 or more logical centers, but always 1 receiver. And the purpose is to tell some place to do something. So the naming of your command should be place order or do this or do that. You're ordering something, you're commanding something to do something. And the coupling style with these types of commands is tight. You also have the event, and the event is more of that pub sub scenario where you have 1 sender, but you have multiple receivers. Many receivers can receive the same event. The event approach is more about letting the world know that something happened. So order placed or user got into the Uber or something like that. You're letting your services, interested services, know that something occurred. And that's more of a loose coupling approach because you don't need to know how and who will consume that event. Now, for demo purposes, I'm going to make a very simple example command. So all I need to do is I'm going to say public class example command, and then I'm going to implement the I command interface. So if you want to make a command, that's what you have to do. And then I'm going to create a single property. So string text, just to carry some text in that command. And then in here, I'm going to say command equals new example command text equals hello world. And then I'm going to pass down I to differentiate each message. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that endpoint instance and I'm going to say endpoint instance dot send local, send to that local learning transport for now. This is not what you would use in production. It is just for demo, but I'm going to send to local this command, and then I'm going to add a second delay. So I'm going to say delayed for a second, and that's it. After that, I'm just going to say endpoint instance dot stop. That's going to stop it, and then the application will just exit. Now I can't just publish a command and not have someone to consume it. So for that reason, I'm also going to create a handler. So I'm going to say public class example command handler, and you need to implement the I handle messages interface, which is one of those like old school things. Like it used to be cool to use the I on the interface as a class. I am doing something, so I handle messages. I think it's dumb nowadays. I really don't like it, and I wish this wasn't here. It was just an iMessage handler because that's what it is, and that's totally fine. I'm just gonna say example command here, and then I'm going to implement the missing method. And then I have 2 things. I have the context, which if you can see here, that's the message context. It has a bunch of things about the message like message ID, reply address, and a bunch of other things, but I can also use it to publish, reply, or send. Send is for commands, replies for messages, publish is for events, by the way. And I can use that to send another message somewhere else. I don't necessarily have to inject another thing in here to do that. But in terms of handling, all I want to do is I want to say console write line, and I'm just going to write down the text of that message, and then I'm just going to say task.completed task. That's it. That's my handler. And in terms of setup, that's it. I don't really need to do anything else. If I just go ahead and I run this, what's going to happen is 3 messages will be published on a second delay, and you're going to see that I'm going to have hello world 0, 1, and 2 with 1 second delays published, and then the application will shut down. As you might have seen as well, you're going to get a no valid license could be found, falling back to trial with license start date, whatever is here, and then license has expired. Get your free local developer license in here. So if I click on that, you can get a free developer license by just signing up to presumably the newsletter. And here you can see how pricing works. So you have the free community version with 3 logical endpoints and 10,000 messages per day. That's on the SDK level. And then you have the bunch of other stuff, and if you're a big enterprise, you have an unlimited version as well. Okay, so that's pretty cool, but pretty basic. What I want to do is I want to integrate a real queuing mechanism or a real messaging mechanism in this and see how that would look like. Because learning transports, it's fine to get started, but what's the real use case supposed to look like? Well, to show that I'm going to run RabbitMQ in Docker, and this will also give me an interface so I can see which messages are getting published and where. And what I'll do is I'm going to go to manage NuGet packages, and I'm going to say NServiceBus and I'm going to search for the RabbitMQ transport package. So I can install that, and then I'm going to change this application completely, this console app, to make it more realistic, like a hosted service. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add the Microsoft.extensions.hosting NuGet package. This gives me some hosting capabilities that doesn't necessarily turn it into an API, but it turns it into a long-running service. And I'm going to get a builder. So I'm going to say host.create application builder. I'm going to create an app, and then I'll be able to say build and then app.run. So basically the same thing you would see in a minimal API, but for a long-running application that doesn't expose really anything. Now I'll need to configure NServiceBus here, and I really don't like how NServiceBus is doing this with separate packages, but I have to go here and search for NServiceBus.extensions.hosting. So I'm gonna have to install that. And even then I have to say builder don't use NServiceBus, but this doesn't accept a configuration, options lambda. It accepts an endpoint configuration object, which means I have to do all my configuration outside and then configure this. And by the way, if I go to services and I say NServiceBus, there is nothing here. So I have to use this use NServiceBus. Fine, but very tedious. I really hope they change that. But anyway, I'm going to say endpoint configuration over here, and then new endpoint configuration. I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to say sales, that this is my sales endpoint. So every time some sale is coming through, I can send messages regarding this sale. And then I have to say endpoint configuration, use serialization, and choose system JSON serializer. Why this is not the default and I have to do it every single time, I don't know. Presumably backwards compatibility. That's a problem you have when you have a library that's been around for a very, very long time and doesn't want to break anyone. Then I'm going to need a transport, and I'm going to say endpoint configuration, use transport, and I'm going to use the RabbitMQ transport. So transport RabbitMQ, and then I'm going to say use conventional routing topology, and I'm going to choose the queue type. The quorum is the new highly available queue type. So that's the one I want to use here. Then I'm going to have to configure the connection string. So I'm going to say connection string equals, this is all running locally with default ports. So I'm just going to say MQP, guest, or username and password, localhost, and then the port. I'm going to say transport.connection string, pass that down. And then I also want to say endpoint configuration dot enable installers. And this will install everything about RabbitMQ and all the queues and everything on my behalf. And then I can just take this, pass it down here, and this will all work. Now, again, I need the message to publish. So what I'm going to say is public class create order, and that's going to be an I command. Again, that naming the do something. So I'm just going to give it a GUID, which is the order ID. And then I'm going to have an item name, very simplistic, just for the demo. And I'm going to just initialize this to a new GUID. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the message session out of the app. So I'm going to say app.services.getRequiredService iMessage session. And that's something you can actually just inject into your services as well if you want to publish something. And you can use this to say await message session dot send, and I can send by just passing down a new order. So what I'm going to do is say order equals new create order, and I'm going to set the item name to NServiceBus course. So I'll do that, pass it down here, and then just let it run. And I'm going to show you what's going to happen when I let it run. So I'm going to say run over here, and this will start the long running application and publish the message. And as you're going to see now, it is going to fail because we did not specify a destination. Because now with the real configuration, we have to also configure where this is supposed to go. So the way we can do this is by routing that type of message in a specific location. So what I can say is I can say transport.routing, and that way I can get a routing variable, and I can say routing.route to endpoint what? The type of the create order. And the destination is the name of the endpoint. So sales. And once I do that, then I will be able to send it. But I have nowhere to handle this. So what I'll need to have is also a handler, because remember here, we need to know where this is going, because this is not just publishing an event. We're telling someone that something happened, and that someone needs to exist to listen to it. So I'm going to say public class create order handler. I handle messages create order. I'm going to just say implement that, and I'm just going to write it down. So I'm going to say console.writeLine and then message.item name. That's about it. And in the end, return task completed task. Here we go. So now if I run it, as you're seeing, the application is running. The license manager is a bit annoying because it keeps reminding me that the license has expired, but the message was published, and we actually published two of them. The first one from the last execution, and then this new one. And we can actually go to the RabbitMQ UI to see all that in action. So if I say guest and guest, default username and password, I can see that I acknowledged a message over here. I had a total of 1 messages, and now I have nothing because I processed it. If I go to connections, you're going to see the active connection of the running application. And then if I go into exchanges, you're going to see this fan out type exchange where the sales are going in here. Then a bunch of other topics necessary for NServiceBus. And then in queues, you're going to see the sales queue of type quorum, which was created on our behalf when we configured that we want installers enabled. And that is it. Very easy to start publishing and consuming into RabbitMQ. But what if I don't want to use the command and I just want to use the publishing approach where I just tell the world that something happened and whoever is interested can just listen to it? Very easy. I wouldn't say create order. I would say order created, and that will be an I event now. Not much is changing here. This will still be able to handle messages, but the type will change to order created. I'm going to keep the exact same handler, but I won't be sending anymore. Instead, I'm going to be publishing. So I'm going to say publish an order created object, and I don't need that routing anymore. So I can just delete that, and then I can just run this as it is. And as you're going to see, I will still have that message both sent and handled, and you can see it over here. And if I go back here, you can see again, delivered, acknowledged, and I can go to exchanges. Now it's a bit different. I have an order created fan out, and I have this I event and I message, but all that is managed for me by NServiceBus, which is really, really cool. I don't have to do any heavy lifting. I can just do it on my behalf. Now, what if I want to add something like this in a real application? I want to split the publisher and the consumer. Well, I can do that by going into this movies API, which is an API that can manage movies. So I can create a movie, get a movie, and then update a movie and delete a movie. All that is in memory. But what I want to do is I want to add messaging capabilities in here. So when something happens, I can say movie created, movie updated, movie deleted. And I have my contracts over here. And then I have my messaging contracts outside. So I have the movie created, movie deleted, and movie updated. This is more of an event scenario because we just let the world know that something happened. So what I can do is I can go and add the NServiceBus package in the messaging library, which is reused by both the consumer and the publisher. And then all I want to do here is say that this is an I event. So 1, 2, and 3. Here we go. So we have that, and then the API will be publishing and the movie's consumer will be consuming. So since the consumer will look a lot like what we have already over here, let's start with the consumer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy all that, basically everything here, including connection string and all this, and I'm going to put it in this consumer file. So same thing as before, but I will need here the RabbitMQ NuGet package, and I will need the installer as well, if I'm not wrong. Yes, I do need it because in services, I don't have this add NServiceBus built in. So NServiceBus, and then the hosting package. Here you go, extensions.hosting. I'm gonna add that. And now I have all the configuration I need in my application. This is not sales, this is movies. But other than that, everything is here for me. I don't need to do much. All I need to do is I want to say create my consumers. So the first one is going to be movie created consumer. The next one is going to be movie updated consumer. And the last one is going to be movie deleted consumer. Simple as that. All I have to do for all of these is I handle messages. I really don't like the name, but I can't really do much about it. And then all I want to do is say private read only, I logger, and I want to add loggers in here that just print something to the console to prove that the message was in fact handled. And because these are records, I can just say toString and I'm going to get the string representation of the publishing. And I just have to do this for all the other classes. So I handle messages, movie deleted, and then implement everything, replace this, and this. Here we go. And then once more for updated, I handle messages, movie updated. And that is it. All of my consumers now are ready. And if I was to run just the consumer, it is just going to run doing nothing, mainly because there is nothing to consume, but it does mean that I can now start publishing things from the API and I should be able to see them published in the consumer. So in terms of configuration, it's very similar on the publishing side. Again, I'm going to have to add the RabbitMQ package and the hosting. So hosting first and RabbitMQ. You could also export that into a separate package and then reuse it in both, and then go in configuration, configure everything here just by copy pasting. That is it. And then I can go into my movie service, which is where I manage all the movies, and I can say inject a private read-only iMessage session. So message session, inject from the constructor, and then I can add my publishing. So after you create a movie, create a message, which is movie.map to created message, and then await message session and publish over here message. And that is it. I have to do the same thing for update and deleted. So one goes here, but map to updated, and one goes here, but map to deleted. And all I want to do now is just run the background consumer and also run the API and test it. Does it all work? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to create a movie. And as you can see, the movie has been created. And if I go to consumer, it has been published and then consumed. All that went through RabbitMQ. And we can see that over here, a message was acknowledged and the message rate was 0.2 per second. And then if I go and create the sequel, same year, then again, immediately published and consumed again. Very, very simple, very, very nice. But the promise of NServiceBus and all of these libraries is that what happens if I want to change my queuing mechanism, if I want to change my transport? What if I don't want to use RabbitMQ and I want to use something else like AWS? I want to go to the cloud natively and I don't want to use the RabbitMQ cloud. I just want to use AWS and be done with it. Well, the idea is that first, all you'd have to do is remove the RabbitMQ package, and then you can use one of the other available ones. In this case, we have the SQS package, Amazon SQS over here. So let's select that and install it. And here we go. Obviously, we can't use the RabbitMQ transport anymore, but I can say SQS transport instead. And then I can change different things. I can configure an S3 bucket as well. If I want to have a bigger messages than 256 kilobytes, it's going to store them automatically to an S3 bucket and make it very easy for us. I've already authorized my machine with AWS, so I don't need to specify any keys or anything like that. All I'm going to do is do the exact same thing over here on the consumer side. So install the AWS SQS and delete the RabbitMQ. I don't want to have that. Go back here. Configuration should break. Yes, it did break. Update the transport, remove the configuration string, and then run my consumer. And let's see what happens when I do that. Application is running and I can see that there has been an SQS queue called movies for addressed movies and also one for errors. And there's also a delayed delivery queue, and that's more of an advanced feature. If you want to know more about advanced NServiceBus, please let me know in the comments down below and I can make that video. But if I go on the UI and I say refresh, what I'm going to see now is 3 queues: that delayed 501, first in, first out queue, and then the error, and then the main one, which is the movies, where all the movies messages are going to go into. And even though this is not shown in the transport configuration or on the NuGet package, if we go on SNS, which is the pub sub level, and we go into dashboard, you see that we have 6 topics. Ignore these ones over here. These are from a previous video. It's these ones over here, one per message that we're publishing. This was also created on our behalf to act as that broker. So now to have both things configured so easily, I'm just going to say run the consumer and run the API. So we're running both things over here, and I can go ahead in Insomnia and say create a movie. Movie was created, it was published, and then the consumer, you can see it was consumed. And I can do that again. I can create another movie, and you're going to see in the console the message will be consumed very easily. That goes to AWS and then consumed. And if we go in here, we should be able to see that, yeah, message is available. This is a bit outdated, but this has been triggered, and we should be able to see some metrics over here to show us that there has been a few receives over here, that there is activity in this queue. And we didn't have at any point to interact with the RabbitMQ SDK directly, thank God. And we didn't have to interact with the AWS one either. We kept the exact same code, and we just changed the transport layer and minimal configuration, and it all just works. So that's the promise of NServiceBus, and that's how it makes working with queues and topics and messages so easy. But now I wonder from you, which NuGet package, which library are you using to do your messaging like that? And are you using one in general? Because some people just use the SDK of the tool they're using and they're happy with it. And when time comes to start migrating to something else because maybe they have to, that's where it really hits the fan. So I really want to know, leave a comment down below, let me know. Well, that's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.